Welcome to My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson, a journey into the deepest teachings of Torah and their application to our personal, emotional, and psychological lives.
A good tevach, a good week. We continue our journey in the life-changing Sefer HaTanya. This program is made possible by Rena Lights LLC and is in honor of Branka Berevik's birthday. So we are close to the end of chapter 13, Perek Yud Gimel, which was a continuation of chapter 12 and understanding the Beinoni. The Beinoni, the paradoxical individual that on one hand has a divine soul and animal soul that are actively at battle. On the other hand, he's in control. The divine soul is in control of the thought, speech, and action of this individual. While on the other hand, the animal soul is still active. And that is what's expected of each one of us, to fight the battle and to win. But you're not winning by destroying or annihilating the animal soul, you're subduing it, not allowing it to influence the Irktana Zaguf, the small city, which is the person and the person's faculties. Faculties as they manifest in thought, speech, and action. Now the second part, the end of the chapter, addresses, and just to sum up what we've already discussed in the previous classes, what does it mean to serve genuinely, authentically? Because you can make the argument that it's either true or it's not true, the service of God. A tzaddik whose entire being is completely saturated with godliness, it's a true avodah. Like he explained that emes is not just the absence of untruth. Emes means it's lasting. Tochen la'ad. It lasts forever. It's consistently true through and through. With that in mind, you could argue that only the tzaddik, like he explained in the beginning, he said that tzaddik, dafka tzaddik, is emes lamite. Evdi Hashem be'emes lamite. But a Beinoni, you could argue, is not a true avodah because at the end of the day, the animal soul has not been destroyed. And even when by davening, the animal soul is overpowered by the divine soul, it's only in an overpowering way. So therefore, being that it passes and it's only temporary. Nevertheless, says the Alter Rebbe, that's not the case. That's the case in comparison to tzaddik. But there's another element of emes. The emes that you find in each person's level. So afal pikin legabe madregas habein nikras aveda tama beemes lamite shalahem. So you see in the same, literally in the same phrase, there's emes lamite like an objective, absolute emes lamite, and then there's one we won't call it subjective because it's not just subjective. It's emes lamite compared to that level. So it's true. It's not just relative truth, and it doesn't just say emes lamite. In other words, not just relatively genuine, but categorically genuine, on the level of the Beinoni, each person according to his level. And we explained at length what that means. Because the godliness within the soul is always true. The question if it manifests all the time, that's a difference. So even though before he said a Beinoni, but compared to that tzaddik, it's chelafes ve'veres, that passionate love that he has during tefillah is not there all the time because it passes, it's temporary. But any second he can arouse it again. The words of the Alter Rebbe was that so it's not some anomaly. It's not like an exception. You can do it constantly. Through the proper preparation. So you see here two different manifestations of emes lamite, which on one hand gives us a standard of what's the ultimate, like the tzaddik. On the other hand, we shouldn't get demoralized or broken or in any way feel in any way inferior, because there's an emes lamite, each person according to their level. And when you do what you have to do according to your level, it's emes lamite, like he says. Again, to use the word, and he said not only just emes hareini, I also consider this ava ba'avosar shebitlosim gam kein svas emes tichin la'ad, something that endures forever because it's always accessible, can always awaken it again. Ish ish kefi madregos madregas habeini. And again, be'emes ma'amite. So now the Alter Rebbe is going to continue to explain what this means, because this is a very critical point, because as I pointed out, and I'll say it again, this is meant to empower us, to uplift our spirits, to show us that no matter who you are, you can reach a level of emes lamite, while at the same time, not deceive yourself into thinking you're somebody that you're not. That's why he says, even the whole world says you're a tzaddik, you have to see yourself kirosh like a Beinani. And even Rabbah could fulfill that, as we learned. Because we have to be realistic and understand that we're not on that highest level. Rabbah was on the highest level, but he fulfilled it because that's how he saw himself, that even if you daven all day, it's like davening all day, you still not necessarily means you transformed your animal soul. It means you've controlled it. But at the same time, it's not meant to dismiss what we are capable of doing. So it gives us both the standard of what we can reach and where we are, and where you are is also emes lamite and your madrega. How do we understand this? So you're going to take us now a little deeper journey into what emes is, by explaining the level of Yaakov, who's called Midas HaEmes. And as we'll see, how emes, on one hand, is this highest level of absolute truth, and at the same time, which means on the same time, there's an emes in each level according to that level. Which in many ways, if you think about it from a deeper understanding of Chassidus, is the Eibishter's emes lamite, the only true emes. Like the Rambam brings right in the beginning of Hilchos Yesodei Torah. He says, emes havaya le'elam, the Eibishter's emes. Amitis himotzei, the true reality. But he also created existence. And by virtue of its creation, it has an emes because God created it. But can you say creation is really emes on its own? Not on its own. It's because God created it. That's why it has an emes. That's why it has a truth to it. So really, we're talking about these both elements. You could also bring it in the context where we talk about, on one hand, we say, Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel, 2 days, Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim Chaim. They're both words of the living God. And yet we say, halacha, havai imei halacha kamese. Emes lamite is dafka halacha. The halacha like Beis Hillel. So which one is it? How could you say both are divrei Elokim Chaim? So Chassidus explains. Because in the world of chesed, Hillel is true. Because Hillel's speaking from the perspective through the lens of chesed, of kindness, lenient. Through the eyes of Gvura Vatzilis, Gvura de Kedusha, is more the stringency of Beis Shammai. Shammai is correct. When it comes to halacha, what do you do? Actuality, that reaches emes havaya more than Elokim Chaim. Havaya imei halacha kamese, the level of havaya. But that doesn't in any way negate the truth of Shammai in his world. Why is this so critical? Because if you say that only the Eibishter is emes lamite, and that emes lamite is not accessible in our existence, in a way, there's somewhat of a disconnect, God forbid. Say Hashem Echad. You want to say that the emes of the Eibishters can be found also in existence, even in diversity. The Eibishter's midas, chesed, gvura, each one is emes in its own world. But this goes even deeper when you talk about the midah of emes, as we shall discuss, that emes has both aspects to it. So in a sense, it's saying that the ultimate absolute truth of godliness, which in Aveda is the Aveda of tzaddikim, because they have nothing but God in their lives. The animal soul has been completely transformed to the extent whether it's a tzaddik gomba, tzaddik sheina gomba. That emes is not just in the domain of tzaddikim, it also enters into the world of beinanim. So what does that add? Of course, that makes the emes of the Eibishter even deeper. That even if you're not a perfect person, there's an emes in what you're doing. You can bring in the story of the Alter Rebbe, where people who are non-Chassidim were telling the Alter Rebbe his Talmidim are hypocrites. Because they daven and hours, but we know them, they're not on that level that they're so-called professing to be the way they act. They're like faking it. So the Alter Rebbe responded and said, may be fulfilled in them the words of the Mishnah, Meruba Midateva. What does the Mishnah say? That if a person who's a wealthy person brings a korban, an offering, or gives dakah, and behaves like a pauper, he makes believe like he's not wealthy. So it says that ultimately he'll become that. From wealth, he'll become poor. So the Alter Rebbe said, Meruba Midateva. If that's the case, in a negative, imagine the positive, that a person who behaves on a higher level than he actually is, it will be fulfilled in him. Now, what does that mean? He's not on that level. Because that's the Permeates and etzem of a neshama. Neshama is a chelik elekam mal mamash. It has the godly truth in it. It may be concealed, or it may be challenged by the animal soul that's battling it. So when he discovers the divine soul, it's not discovering something that's superimposed or something that's not real. It's the emes of his life. So by a tzaddik, it's full blown in the sense of ein eid milvad. They think eid ein sof lifnei tzimtzum. Ein nesinus mokum klal le'elam is klal. There's no room for any other truth. Only the ein eid milvad elakuz b'pshitas. Absolute, seamless, divine presence, a consciousness. But that doesn't mean the emes of God doesn't enter into the existence. After the tzimtzum comes the Eir HaKav. The Kav is Eir Ein Sof. It's carrying the emes, but the emes now is being carried through a Eir HaGvul, or depending on the opinion of what the Kav is, but it's being carried through a Kav. It's now a line, as we'll soon learn, it's a line that permeates all of existence. It's bringing the divine truth even into an existence that's post-tzimtzum. Even though you could say emes lamita is only lifnei tzimtzum, but that's not the kavanah. The kavanah is to bring the absolute truth of the divine pre-tzimtzum into a world that's post-tzimtzum. That on one hand, a person can make a mistake. We have free will. On the other hand, there is a divine truth in everything that exists, in existence. And it's our job is to reveal that. So let's now learn on and understand what this midas ha'emes is. She says like this. Kihine, because now midas ha'emes, he midas shel Yaakov. The trait, or midas can be the attribute, personality, the characteristic of truth. Midas ha'emes, personality or the archetype of truth, is midas shel Yaakov. Is Yaakov's personality or Yaakov's paradigm. And this is brought based on the pasuk in Micha, Zayin Beis, Zayin Chof, in Zayin Chof 720 in Micha. The Zohar, based on that, the Zohar is volume 1, Reish Yud Gimel Beis 213b, which says Titein Emes LiYaakov. So what's the deeper meaning of that? That Yaakov and Midas HaEmes come together. Yaakov is the Midas HaEmes, that he personifies the attribute of truth. So we can say Avraham Avinu personifies Chesed, Yitzchak personifies Gevura, to the point that they are like a walking Chesed and a walking Gevura on this earth, and Yaakov personifies the walking Emes in this world. Midas HaEmes, which in Sfiris is Midas HaTiferes. Avraham Chesed, to the right, Yamin, Yitzchak Gvura to the left, and the middle is Tiferes. So the Alter Rebbe asks a question of Kut Torah. So what does that mean? The Chimidas Ava V'Yira, the Midah of Avram and Yitzchak, ain't a emes chas v'sham. They're not emes. So the answer is, like we learned, it depends what you're talking about. Of course they're emes. The emes of Chesed, the emes of Gvura, but an emes that permeates completely and throughout, through and through, like the tzaddik. That's Dafka Midas of Yaakov. Because there's no shinui. By Avram it says, Yotzim Mimenu Yishmael. By Yitzchak you say, Yotzim Mimenu Esav. By Yaakov, Mitoshe Shlema. Because there was a consistency. So this in no way minimizes the emes of the Aveda Avram, but Avram's Aveda is in Chesed. It's not Gevurah. And Tiferes encompasses it all. Then the Alter Rebbe continues. So let's go. So now we know that Yaakov is the Midas Emes, but it's not finished yet. So what does he say? Like this. When Avram is Chesed, like we said, Yosem and Yishmael, Chesed has to be tempered. If Chesed is unbridled, it can lead into Yishmael. Same thing with Gevurah. When it comes to Tiferes, Emes is one that is true in every situation. So it has that consistency. That's why it says Tiferes blends and harmonizes between Chesed and Gevurah. Okay. But now he calls, there's another name for this. Hanikra Briach HaTichun. This level of Yaakov, Emes, and like I said, Tiferes, is called Briach HaTichun. The Zohar calls it Briach HaTichun. Zohar Chelik Beis, Kuf Ayin Hey Amid Beis, 175b. So he calls it Briach HaTichun. Briach HaTichun is the middle rod, the central bar that talk about when the Mishkan was built and the walls had to be connected. So there was the bars on top and on the bottom that just ran from one wall to the next, and there was one Briach HaTichun Hamavriach min hakotza lakotza, which reaches from one end to the other, as he explains in Sefer Shmos. Because it's the same idea. Briach HaTichun Mavriach min hakotza lakotza means it's all pervasive, from one end to the other. We mentioned from the Yerushalmi, Emes. The word Emes itself, made up of 3 letters. Aleph, Mem, Sof. Aleph is the first of the Hebrew alphabet. Sof is the last of the Hebrew alphabet. And Mem is exactly the 11th letter, right in the middle. Hamavriach min hakotza lakotza, because truth is not only in a selective form. It's not localized. If it's true in one place, it's true throughout. It runs and reaches from one end to the other. It's true everywhere. Like Tiferes, according to Kabbalah Chassidus, Tiferes is what bekavem tzoi. Think of it like the spine in the human body that runs from the bottom of the central nervous system, the bottom of the skull and the brain, all the way down, and then it branches off to the different nerves throughout the body. But the central spine, like the trunk of a tree, is the central artery. That's what Emes is. Mavriach min hakotza lakotza, mereim hamaylas shemadreges at sev kol dargin. From the highest of elevations and planes to the lowest of all rungs, to the lowest of all levels. So it's true through and through. So what do you see from this? First of all, the point that Emes is consistent throughout. What he said, talking la'ad, it's forever. Not just isolated in one place. Think of like a scientific experiment. How do they want to establish the veracity, the truth of a theory? You have to prove it under all circumstances. If you do an experiment and it only works in cold weather, or only in heat, in warm weather, or only in a wet place, or in a dry place, you don't know if it's real. because maybe it's only true in that under those circumstances. You want to test it in every possible environment, just as an example. So the more that something withstands differences, the more truth it demonstrates. Or when somebody testifies, a witness in court, or any piece of evidence, and then you challenge it. You cross-examine, and you want to see, is it true in all circumstances, or when you put pressure on the person, or you start going into details, you realize, well, he wasn't, I don't remember exactly. So truth is reflected in looking at something from every possible angle. If it's true only in the one circumstance, maybe it didn't really happen that way. Maybe it's only relative. Maybe you saw it from your angle, but you want it from all angles. So that's why it's mavriach min hakotza lakotza. Here, obviously, we're not talking about human witnesses or human verification. We're talking about on a higher divine level. So he says, mavriach min hakotza lakotza. So the same thing, going back to Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim Chaim. There are circumstances where Shammai's opinion is the one that is more relevant, even though in general the halacha is like Hillel. Certain circumstances, there are exceptions. There are certain circumstances like Hillel. But the halacha means under all circumstances. But that doesn't mean there isn't a truth to the theory according to Pi Gvura or Pi Chesed. Okay. So on one hand we see from this the first point about emes, that it's emes throughout. It's not a relative truth. It's not just according to one level. But then comes the other side of the story. What's the other side of the story? The Alter Rebbe continues. Ubechol Milo Madrega. And now that we've mentioned that it goes through from the whole Seder Shtalshlus, the whole structure, from the highest levels to the lowest levels, and all consistent. Bechol Milo Madrega. This is how truth works. At each gradation, each elevation and level, mavriach teich nekuda amtsois. It penetrates the focal point of each level and level. So it's not just that it carries a type of equal truth throughout. In each case, it penetrates that particular level. She nekuda zabchinas midas emes shalah, which is the pivotal point of its truth, of the truth of that level. So let's explain with an example. You have a teacher, a brilliant teacher, is teaching an idea to a class. The class has different students of different levels. So there's a fundamental truth that he's conveying to all of them equally. Whatever the truth is that Breishis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'saaretz. God created heaven and earth. Or another truthful statement. Let's take a statement, 2 + 2 = 4. Or other statements like that. So there's a universal truth that all the students are hearing equally. But the students are of different levels. Some of them are more advanced, some are less advanced. So the truth of the teacher is not just that he's giving one message to all of them. Each student, according to his needs, according to his level, is going to understand that same truth in a different way. Not a different way, not a different truth, God forbid, but with a different profundity, understand maybe the proofs for it, depending on each level. So a good teacher is not just sharing something equally, but as he's sharing it, each one is going to hear it in the way that he can relate to it. So the truth is not different truths, but different ways you experience that truth. So if all the students heard exactly the same thing, then what's lacking? It's not necessarily customized according to each person's particular way. The brilliant teacher is such that each one will say, I got it, and they'll all explain it differently perhaps, but they'll all explain the same idea. So the truth also is relative to each one's level, that even the simpler student also gets it on a simpler level. The more advanced student will be able to explain it on a deeper level. So what you see here is that truth has 2 aspects to it. One, there's an equality that it equalizes, a commonality between all levels. Mavriach min hakotza lakotza, it's true everywhere. Another is that in each place it penetrates, like he says, and permeates, it penetrates. Let's read it again. Mavriach teich nekuda amtsois. So it's not just carrying it equally, it's penetrating each level according to its level. Midas emes shalah. Remember before he spoke about by the Beinoni, he said that it's the ishkefi madregas habenim lamite shalahem avidatam be'emes lamite shalahem of each Beinoni, of the Beinoni on his level. So here we see now the second side of emes, that it permeates and penetrates each level according to that level. So let's use another example, which perhaps can drive the point home. The Rambam brings in the methods of chinuch, of educating children, that chanech al na'al pi darkei, you educate a child according to his or her way. Gam ki yaskin le'yosem mimeno. So even when he gets older, he won't waver from it. What does this mean practically? That each child you have to give according to his needs. A child, for example, is learning Torah. So for a child, how do you create an incentive? You give him some reward. You give him a candy, a toy, some way to show him that when you learn Torah, it's valuable. There was a custom by many mothers, grandmothers, that they would smear a page of Torah, a page, or some people did the Sharblat of Tanya, with sugar and honey to show a child that when you learn Torah, it's sweet to your mouth. As the custom at Einfirnish, when you bring a child into school, you wrap him in a talis, and you throw candies and say, Malach Machol through these candies. So the obvious klotz kasha, the simple question is, you teaching a child the truth or what? One day the child will grow older and find out that the Malach Machol, not the angel Machol, threw the candies, the parents threw the candies, the teacher threw the candies. That the honey and sugar, Torah is honey and sugar, Torah is spiritual sweetness. And yet, that's the way you convey it to a child. So what are we doing here? Teaching a child something that's compromised? So the answer is no, it's like an example. It's like a mashal. When you teach someone an idea and you give an example, the example's from a different paradigm. You're not fooling him, God forbid. You're finding a way to bring the truth of the idea into a language that he could understand. Right now, he can't understand the idea itself. He can't understand spiritual sweetness. But where does physical sweetness come from? It evolves, nishtalshlu, it evolves from spiritual sweetness. So right now, this candy is the physical sweetness. Malach Machol is using the parents as shluchim. They're shluchim that are carrying the sweetness that Malach Machol is throwing to the child. So the truth is, you're giving the child a levush, a garment, a moshel. It's not, God forbid, something that's not true. The same idea here. Truth is on one hand, that's a continuous system, a continuous, consistent truth, but it's a truth that can be manifest in different garments, and the garments are reflecting that same truth, each person according to their level. That's what the Alter Rebbe is saying. If you think about it, it's unbelievable, because he's saying that the highest truths, even of the tzaddik, reach also to the Beinoni. Not the same level, obviously, but it means the truth of godliness can come even to a child on his level. When he's eating candy or honey and learning Torah with that, it's reminding him of God's sweetness. When he gets older, he'll understand the sweetness is a spiritual sweetness. And higher and higher and higher. So that's the two sides of emes that he's been discussing here. And with this, we'll conclude for now. We still have to finish the last lines of the Perek, which we'll do in the next year. Everyone have a good tavoch. TanyaApplied.com. You can find this and all the other previous programs, as well as ask any question. Thank you, and be well. It should be Yehovch Yom Meil L'Sason L'Simcha U'Lemeyadim Tevim. Everyone have a transformative Tisha B'Av. In that sad day, the pnimius of it is the sweetness of Mashiach being born. Gula Hamitis Vashlei.
This has been My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson. Please join us again next week. Visit ChasidusApplied.com for archived classes and more resources.